Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into one of the most talked about, most persistent mysteries in recent history. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Absolutely. A 3-year-old girl who vanished on May 3, 2007 from a holiday apartment in Praia da Luz, Portugal.
And our mission today, as always, is to sift through a whole stack of sources on this. We want to pull out the key information, the insights, really, to help you get a solid handle on all the complex parts of this case.
From what happened right at the start to the latest twists and, all the things that keep the story in the headlines.
Exactly. So let's dig in.
It's a case that's just gripped people globally for, over 17 years now. And to really get it, you need the basics first. Madeleine and her family.
Right.
She was born May 12, 2003 in Rothley, UK. Very recognizable child, blonde hair, blue-green eyes. And she had this very distinctive mark in her right eye, a dark strip on the iris called a coloboma.
Coloboma, okay, so easy to identify. And her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, both doctors.
Yeah, Kate's a GP, Jerry's a consultant cardiologist. They met back in 93, married in 98. Madeleine was born in 2003, and then they had twins, a boy and a girl, in 2005.
And this trip was a spring break, 7 nights at the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz. It's in the Algarve region of Portugal, sometimes called Little Britain, right?
That's the place. And the specific apartment, 5A, is just central to everything that follows. Ground floor, 2 bedrooms.
And it had 2 ways in or out.
Basically, yes. A front door onto a street, Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva, and then sliding glass patio doors at the back.
Okay.
Those patio doors looked out over the pool area, tennis courts, and crucially, the tapas restaurant they used.
Ah, the restaurant. And the kid's bedroom. Where was that exactly?
Right next to the front door. It had this waist-high window, curtains, and importantly, a metal shutter on the outside.
And that shutter. How did it work?
Well, it had a cord inside to control it. The key thing, supposedly, is that you couldn't raise it from the outside without using force. Madeleine was sleeping in a single bed right near that door. The twins were in travel cots nearby.
Okay, that detail about the shutter feels important. And their evening routine, the Tapas 7 arrangement.
Right. The McCanns and their holiday friends, the group known as the Tapas 7, they ate together every evening at that tapas restaurant, which was pretty close, about 55 meters away.
55 meters, not far. But there's that detail about the note.
Yes, a note left by resort staff. It was at the pool reception, asking for the same table each night so the group could overlook the apartments. It even mentioned the children were asleep inside. Pate later worried, that maybe an abductor saw that note.
Chilling thoughts. And instead of using the resort's childcare, the creche,
they decided against it. The Ocean Club did offer a night creche, but the McCanns apparently preferred to keep the kids' 7 p.m. bedtime routine. So the group decided they'd just check on their own kids at regular intervals, roughly every half hour.
a predictable pattern. Which in hindsight.
Exactly. Seems so normal at the time, but became incredibly significant.
So May 3rd, 2007, the day before they were due to leave, anything unusual happened during the day.
Well, a couple of things mentioned in the sources. That morning, Madeleine apparently asked her mother, "Why didn't you come when my brother and I cried last night?" A small thing, maybe, but noted. Kate also noticed a large brown stain on Madeleine's pajamas. The kids spent the morning at the kids' club. Kate took what turned out to be the last known photo of Madeleine by the pool. That was at 2:29 p.m.
Wow.
Then bedtime around 7:00 p.m. Madeleine was put down in her pink and white Aor pajamas, Marks & Spencer's, with her comfort blanket, Cuddle Cat.
Okay, so the evening routine starts. The checks.
Yes. Around 9:05 p.m., Jerry McCann does the first check on apartment 5A. He found the children asleep. But he did notice something odd.
What was that?
He remembered leaving the children's bedroom door just slightly ajar, but now it was almost wide open. He pulled it nearly closed again before heading back to the restaurant. And the patio doors they were using to go in and out, usually left unlocked.
Right. Then just 10 minutes later, 9:15 p.m.
That's the Jane Tanner sighting. She's one of the Tapas 7. She saw a man carrying a child, not necessarily Madeleine, walking away from the apartment block towards the beach area.
And this led to EFITs.
It did, yes. It was a big focus initially. But this is a key point about how investigations evolve. It turned out years later, in 2013, this was likely a British tourist carrying his own daughter home from the night crush. He came forward himself.
So a significant early lead that turned out to be unrelated.
Yeah.
Okay. What happened next?
Around 9:30 p.m., Matthew Oldfield, another friend in the group, offered to check on the McCann children when he went to check his own. He also noticed their bedroom door was wide open.
The door again?
Yes. He listened, didn't hear anything, so he left. Crucially, he didn't look far enough into the room to actually see Madeleine's bed. He couldn't later recall if the window or the shutter were open or closed.
And the Portuguese police later focused on him because of this.
They did initially, because he volunteered to do the check. There was even a suggestion, according to some sources, that maybe he'd passed Madeleine out the window, just shows the level of suspicion early on.
Okay, so Oldfield checks at 9:30. Then there's another sighting.
Yes, around 10:00 p.m. This is the Smith sighting. Martin and Mary Smith, a family on holiday, saw a man carrying a small girl. Blonde hair, pale skin, light-colored pajamas, barefoot, aged about 3 or 4.
Matching Madeleine's description.
Pretty closely, yes. This was about 500 yards, 460 meters from apartment 5A. The man was described as mid-30s, average height, slim build, short brown hair, wearing cream or beige trousers.
And the Smiths felt he seemed off.
They said he didn't look like a tourist, seemed uncomfortable carrying the child. E-fits from their description were made later in 2008, but only really publicized in 2013.
And there was some initial confusion about whether he looked like Jerry McCann.
Martin Smith apparently thought so at first, but later accepted he must have been mistaken, as Jerry was definitely back at the Tapas restaurant at that time.
Right. So 10:00 p.m. is also when Kate McCann goes to check.
Exactly. Kate goes for her check at 10:00 p.m. She sees the children's bedroom door wide open. As she gets closer, a gust of wind apparently slams it shut.
Oh, wow.
She goes inside. The window is open. The exterior shutter is raised. The twins are asleep in their cots. But Madeleine's bed is empty. She's gone.
Just gone.
She runs straight back to the restaurant screaming, "Madeleine's gone! They've taken her!"
That phrase, "they've taken her," became significant later, didn't it?
It did, yes. We'll get into why the police found that suspicious. But the immediate aftermath, it was chaos.
How so?
Resort staff were alerted pretty quickly. Between 10:10 and 10:30 p.m., the police were called. The GNR, the local police, arrived around 10:30 p.m. They alerted the PJ, the investigative police, around midnight.
But the PJ didn't arrive until
1:00 a.m. And in that crucial early period, the crime scene, apartment 5A, wasn't secured properly. Sources say around 20 people, staff, friends, police went in and out before it was sealed off.
20 people. That's not ideal for forensics.
Not at all. There's even an account of a GNR officer dusting the outside of the bedroom window shutter for fingerprints without wearing gloves.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. And the apartment itself, after the initial search, was apparently left empty for a month, then even let out again to tourists briefly before being sealed properly in August 2007 for more tests.
That initial handling, the potential contamination,
Yeah.
it must have cast a shadow over everything that followed.
Absolutely. It undoubtedly hampered the forensic investigation and, probably fueled some of the early suspicions and theories that started swirling. A PJ officer even admitted later that the Portuguese police were suspicious of the McCanns right from the start, partly because of all the media attention, the media circus, as he called it.
And speaking of the media, Jerry McCann made a conscious choice early on to really push the story, right? To market Madeleine.
He did. The idea was to keep her faith, her story, in the public eye constantly. This involved bringing in major British PR firms like Bell Pottinger and Hanover Communications, even government press officers. It was pretty unprecedented for a missing person case.
Did it work? I mean, it certainly kept the case visible.
Oh, incredibly visible. Madeleine was on the front page of British tabloids almost daily for months, but it was a double-edged sword. It also led to immense pressure and criticism, accusations of trial by media, and eventually what many called the monstering of the McCanns.
The public scrutiny was intense, wasn't it?
Fierce. They were heavily criticized for leaving the children alone, even though the checks were frequent. People questioned why they didn't use the creche or a babysitter. Kate's appearance, her composure, was endlessly analyzed.
The whole not crying on camera thing.
Exactly. She was described as cold, controlled. Apparently, abduction experts had advised her to remain composed in public appeals, but in the Portuguese media especially, this didn't play well. It led to those awful comparisons with Lindy Chamberlain in Australia.
A tough situation.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the official investigation was focusing elsewhere initially.
Yes. The first formal suspect, or arguido, was Robert Murat. He was named on May 15, 2007. Anglo-Portuguese guy, lived very near the apartment complex.
What was the suspicion based on?
His proximity, and perhaps some inconsistencies in his account of his movements, though details are complex. His house was searched, but ultimately nothing concrete was found. He was formally cleared when the case was archived in July 2008.
And he later sued the press.
Successfully, he received £600,000 in libel damages from various newspapers for false allegations made against him.
Okay, so Mirat was cleared, but then the focus shifted dramatically.
It did, towards the McCanns themselves. Suspicions were simmering, but it became more public around June 2007. A German journalist actually asked them directly if they were involved.
Wow, blunt.
Then, at the end of June, a Portuguese weekly paper, Sol, published a big article titled The Madeleine Case, A Pact of Silence. It basically laid out the police suspicion, claiming the McCanns were suspects, highlighting alleged inconsistencies in their stories, even suggesting the Tanner sighting was made up.
Relying on leaks, presumably.
Almost certainly. The article detailed things only the police would likely know at that point.
What were the main inconsistencies the PJ focused on?
Several things. Whether the McCanns and their friends used the front door or the patio doors for the checks, whether the front door was locked or not. Jerry's statements seemed to change on this.
And the shutter again.
Yes, the shutter. Kate said it was closed when Madeleine went to bed, but open when she found her missing. Jerry apparently later said he lowered it earlier, but found it could be raised from outside. But the PJ insisted it couldn't be opened from outside without force, and crucially, they found no signs of forced entry anywhere.
No forced entry. That's key for the police theory, isn't it?
It was central, and Kate's cry of, "They've taken her." The police viewed that with suspicion, too. They saw it, potentially, as her immediately trying to establish an abduction narrative, maybe too quickly.
So by August 2007, this suspicion evolved into a full-blown theory.
Pretty much, yes. The PJ's working theory became that Madeleine had died in apartment 5A, an accident, perhaps involving sedation, that went wrong, and that her parents had covered it up.
Covered it up how?
The theory was they hid her body initially, then moved it later, possibly using the Renault Scenic car they rented about 3 weeks after she disappeared. Even in 2010, reports suggested most Portuguese investigators still believed this version of events.
And this is where the sniffer dogs come in. Keela and Eddie.
Exactly. British police dogs brought over in late July 2007. Keela was trained to detect human blood. Eddie was a cadaver dog trained to detect the scent of human remains.
What did they find? Or rather, what did they alert to?
Both dogs alerted in apartment 5A behind the sofa in the living room. Eddie, the cadaver dog, also alerted near a wardrobe in the main bedroom.
And outside the apartment?
Eddie alerted to Madeleine's soft toy, Cuddle Cat, which was now in the McCann's rented villa. Then, on August 6, Eddie alerted outside the driver's door of that Renault Scenic rental car. Keela, the blood dog, alerted inside the car in the boot and a map compartment.
That sounds damning, but there were explanations offered.
Yes. A source close to the McCann's team suggested any cadaver scent on Kate's clothes, which might have transferred to the toy or car, could simply be from her job as a doctor dealing with deceased patients.
Plausible. What about the forensic analysis of what the dogs found?
This is incredibly important and often misunderstood. Hair and fiber samples from the apartment and the car were sent to the Forensic Science Service, FSS, in the UK, in Birmingham.
And the results.
On September 3, 2007, the FSS sent an email about a sample from the car boot. It said the sample contained 15 out of Madeleine's 19 DNA components. Now, that sounds significant.
It does.
But the FSS report also stated the result was too complex for meaningful interpretation. It could have come from multiple people, maybe 3 to 5 contributors. And the crucial conclusion was, and I quote, "We cannot answer the question, is the match genuine or is it a chance match?"
So highly ambiguous DNA evidence. Inconclusive.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. Sources suggest Leicestershire police in the UK knew the Portuguese authorities were potentially misinterpreting this complex DNA result as stronger evidence than it was.
And they didn't step in to clarify.
Apparently not directly, no. The reasons cited were complex Portuguese judicial secrecy laws, the need to maintain a good working relationship. But it meant the PJ were seemingly operating under the belief they had stronger DNA evidence linking Madeleine to that car boot than the FSS report actually supported.
That seems a massive issue in an investigation. Potential misunderstanding of key forensic evidence.
It highlights the huge challenges in international investigations, doesn't it? Different systems, different interpretations, communication barriers. It's a critical point.
So with this backdrop, the pressure on the McCanns intensified.
Massively. On September 5th, Kate was interviewed again. She was allegedly offered some kind of deal. Admit Madeleine died accidentally, admit hiding the body, and she might face only a 2-year sentence, with Jerry potentially not being charged at all.
She refused.
She did. She exercised her right not to answer 48 specific questions during an 11-hour interview. Jerry did answer questions in his interview. It was then the PJ formally told Jerry that Madeleine's DNA had been found in the car boot and behind the sofa, likely based on that complex, inconclusive FSS report.
And then they were made arguidos.
Both of them, yes, on September 7th, 2007, formal suspects.
But they were allowed to leave Portugal.
Yes, which surprised some people. Despite their arguido status, they were permitted to fly back to the UK on September 9th.
And the Portuguese investigation continued without them there.
Well, the day after they left, September 10th, the chief inspector leading the case, Tavares de Almeida, signed off on a report. It formally concluded that Madeleine had died in apartment 5A due to an accident.
So doubling down on the accident theory.
Yes. The report alleged the Tapas checks were part of the cover-up, that the Tapas 7 had misled the police, and that the McCanns hid the body and faked the abduction. Around this time, Kate's personal diary, which the police had seized, was somehow leaked, and excerpts were published in tabloids in Portugal and the UK, even though a court had ruled against its seizure.
Just relentless pressure. So how did that first phase of the investigation end?
It sort of fizzled out, officially. On July 21st, 2008, almost a year after the McCanns became arguidos, Portugal's Attorney General made an announcement.
What was it?
He said there was simply no evidence linking the McCanns, or Robert Brueckner for that matter, to Madeleine's disappearance. Their arguido status was lifted, the case was officially archived, closed.
Closed, so no conclusion.
Pretty much. The case files, thousands of pages were released. The final report essentially said, "We can't find any proof to form a lucid, sensible, serious, and honest conclusion about what happened. An admission of defeat, really."
But that wasn't the end of the controversy, was it? Amaril's book.
Yeah, not by a long shot. Just 3 days after the case was archived, Gonçalo Amaral, the PJ chief inspector who had initially led the investigation, but was removed in October 2007, published his book.
Maddie, The Truth of the Lie.
That's the one. It laid out his theory again: accident in the apartment, cover-up by the parents, faked abduction.
And the McCanns sued him.
They did, for libel. They actually won damages initially in 2015, but Amaral appealed, and he won the appeal in 2016. It went all the way to Portugal's Supreme Court.
And the outcome?
In February 2017, the Supreme Court ruled against the McCanns. Crucially, the court stated that the archiving of the criminal case in 2008 did not mean the McCanns had been cleared of suspicion. So Amaral's claims, while damaging, were deemed within the bounds of acceptable commentary given the unresolved nature of the case in Portugal.
So the official Portuguese investigation is closed, but the McCanns haven't given up. They set up their own fund.
Right, Madeleine's Fund. Leaving no stone unturned limited. Set up back in May 2007. It raised a lot of money through public donations and also received those significant libel damages, like £550,000 from Express newspapers.
And they used this money to hire private investigators.
Yes, several over the years. An early one was Control Risks, apparently hired by an anonymous benefactor. Then there was a Spanish agency, Método 3.
Método 3. I remember headlines about them.
You probably do. Their director, Francisco Marco, made some pretty bold public claims saying he knew who took Madeleine where she was. It caused friction with the McCanns, who were paying them around £50,000 a month, and they eventually stopped using them.
Any others?
Dave Edgar, a retired detective inspector, was hired in 2009. He released an e-fit of a woman reportedly seen in Barcelona asking about getting her new daughter delivered. And then there was Oakley International.
Oakley International. That name rings a bell, too, and not in a good way.
Unfortunately, no. A Washington, D.C. registered agency hired in 2008 for a reported £500,000 for 6 months, led by someone presented as a former MI5 officer. They focused on the Smith sighting, produced more e-fits.
Right.
The head, Kevin Halligan, was later exposed as a con man, a fraudster. He had faked his intelligence credentials. Most of that £500,000 given to him was never recovered.
That's just awful, exploiting their desperation.
It really underscores the vulnerability of families in these situations, trying anything, anyone to find answers.
So private investigations had mixed, even disastrous results. But then the official investigation got a new lease of life in the UK. Operation Grange.
Yes, this was a major turning point. In May 2011, the Sun newspaper was serializing Kate McCann's book, Madeleine. They hosted an open letter from the McCanns appealing directly to the then Prime Minister David Cameron, asking for a near comprehensive review of the case.
And the government responded.
Very quickly. Within 24 hours, Scotland Yard announced the launch of Operation Grange, a dedicated team, initially 29 detectives plus support staff led by DCI Andy Redwood. Crucially, it was funded by the Home Office.
That's significant government backing. How much did it cost?
By late 2018, the estimated cost was around $11.75 million. Funding was approved year by year, continuing well beyond that.
What was Operation Grange's focus? Were they looking at the accident theory too?
No, their mandate was explicit. Investigate this as a criminal act by a stranger. The main theories they explored were a planned abduction or perhaps a burglary that went wrong.
Burglary angle. Was there evidence for that?
There had been a notable spike in local burglaries just before Madeleine disappeared, a fourfold increase, reportedly, including 2 break-ins in the McCann-specific apartment block in the 17 days prior. So it was a plausible line of inquiry.
But did they stick with that theory?
They investigated it thoroughly. By April 2017, Scotland Yard's assistant commissioner said the burglary idea wasn't completely ruled out, but the main suspect groups linked to that theory had been, in his words, pretty much closed off.
So they cast a wide net.
Immense. Operation Grange reviewed and translated tens of thousands of documents from the Portuguese files. They commissioned and released new age-progressed images of Madeleine. They investigated over 8,000 potential sightings worldwide, took over 1,300 statements, collected over 1,000 exhibits, looked into 650 known sex offenders, and identified around 60 specific persons of interest.
A huge amount of work.
Yeah.
Did it stay at that scale?
No, by October 2015, the main investigative team was scaled back significantly, down to just 4 detectives, but they continued to receive funding to pursue specific leads.
What kind of leads were they still chasing?
Mobile phone data became quite important. Using tracking techniques with cooperation from like 30 different countries, they analyzed calls made near the Ocean Club around the time Madeleine vanished.
Any specific phones of interest?
Yes, they tracked calls linked to a former local bus driver and his associates. Also, the phone of a former Ocean Club restaurant worker named Euclides Montero. He died in an accident in 2009, but there was suspicion he might have been involved in break-ins, possibly to fund a drug habit.
And they looked into other potential suspects or theories.
Definitely. They explored links to sexual assaults in other holiday homes in the region. They looked into known British pedophiles who might have been in the Algarve.
Anyone specific named in reports?
Several names came up over the years. Raymond Hewlett, a British pedophile who died, claimed he knew something. There was a man from Northern Ireland, also deceased, implicated in another assault. A Swiss man, Urs Hans von Eisch, linked to another child murder case before he died. Even the late broadcaster Clement Freud came under scrutiny. He had a house in Praia da Luz, knew the McCanns, and faced posthumous allegations of child sexual abuse, though no direct link to Madeleine's case was ever established.
Just shows how many avenues they explored. But the biggest recent development came from Germany, didn't it? Christian Brueckner.
Yes, June 2020. German prosecutors in Braunschweig made a stunning announcement. They declared Christian Brueckner their prime suspect in the abduction and, they believe, murder of Madeleine McCann.
Who is he?
He's a German citizen, in his 40s now, already in prison in Germany for other offenses. Crucially, back in 2007, he was living in the Algarve, often in a distinctive VW camper van. He has a long criminal record, including burglary and, significantly, sexual abuse of children.
What links him specifically to Madeleine's disappearance?
The key piece seems to be mobile phone data. Records apparently place a phone known to be used by Brueckner very close to the Ocean Club complex, specifically apartment 5A, within about an hour of the time Madeleine is thought to have vanished. Plus, the day after she disappeared, he apparently re-registered his camper van into someone else's name.
That sounds suspicious. Have the German authorities charged him?
This is important. They haven't formally charged him with Madeleine's murder yet. They've said they have strong evidence she is dead and that Brueckner is responsible, strong enough to name him as the main suspect. Portuguese authorities also formally made him an arguido in 2022, just before the statute of limitations potentially ran out there.
But Brueckner denies it.
He does. He maintains his innocence through his lawyers, and recently he was actually acquitted on appeal for some unrelated sexual offense charges in Germany, though he remains imprisoned for others. So the legal situation is still ongoing and complex.
Have there been searches connected to Brueckner?
Yes, several. In July 2020, German police searched an allotment garden in Hanover he used to frequent.
And more recently in Portugal.
That's right. In May 2023, a major search operation involving German, Portuguese, and British police took place near the Arade Dam. It's about 30 miles, maybe 50 kilometers, from Praia da Luz. Brueckner reportedly used to visit the area. There was also a report that a child's sock had been found near there back in 2008. The German investigators seem to believe it's a place he might have gone after the abduction, possibly even where Madeleine's body might have been disposed of, perhaps in the reservoir.
Did they find anything significant?
Nothing definitive has been announced publicly from that search. Then, even more recently, in June 2025, German police got permission for another search. This time closer to Praia da Luz, focusing on scrubland and abandoned buildings between the resort and a cottage Brueckner once used.
Using heavy equipment.
Yes, diggers, ground-penetrating radar. But reports suggested this search wasn't based on super specific intelligence, maybe more of an investigator's hunch or vague intelligence. It shows they're still actively looking for physical evidence, but perhaps struggling to pinpoint exactly where to look after all this time.
It's incredible how this case also became such a landmark for the role of media, and later, social media.
Absolutely. One writer, Eilisa Hanlon, called it almost a metaphor for the rise of social media. Twitter was barely a year old when Madeleine vanished.
And it became a hotbed for discussion, and worse.
Yes. Vitriol, speculation, conspiracy theories. Even a decade later, the #McCann hashtag was generating hundreds of tweets an hour. Awful stuff, too. Threats against the McCann twins, people openly talking about sabotaging appeals with fake sightings, just the dark side of online anonymity.
And we talked about the monstering of the McCanns in the traditional media, too.
Right. The initial wave of sympathy eventually turned sour for many outlets and commentators. The criticism about leaving the children, the focus on their class suggestions a working-class couple might have faced neglect charges, and Kate's perceived coldness.
But they fought back against some of the worst media coverage. Through libel actions.
They did, yes. The McCanns and some of the Tapa 7 group brought several successful libel cases against UK newspapers. Express newspapers paid that £550,000 to the fund and printed front-page apologies. Robert Murat also won significant damages, £600,000, from multiple newspapers, plus an apology from Sky News. It shows the real damage false reporting caused.
So after all these years, all these investigations, suspects, series, where does the case stand now?
Fundamentally, Madeleine McCann is still missing. No body has ever been found. No one has been charged specifically with her abduction or murder. Christian Brueckner remains the prime suspect for German and Portuguese authorities, but the investigation is ongoing.
And the McCanns, how are they coping?
They've consistently said they remain undaunted in their search. They cannot give up until they know what happened to her. They still hold on to the belief she could be alive.
Still buying presents for her.
Yes, birthday and Christmas presents every year. They've spoken about being open with the twins about what happened, telling them simply that a naughty man took Madeleine.
It's hard to even imagine the pain they live with. The continued hope is remarkable.
It is. But you also have the grim reality investigators face. Statistically, children abducted for sexual motives, if they aren't found quickly, the prognosis is often bleak. The logistics of keeping a child hidden long-term are immense. Yet the McCanns cling to that hope for closure, whatever form it takes finding Madeleine alive or at least getting definitive answers.
It's been over 17 years. Millions spent. Multiple police forces involved across different countries, yet still no concrete proof, no final answer.
And that's what makes this case so compelling and so frustrating. This deep dive really shows it's so much more than just a missing person report. It's tangled up with media ethics, police procedures, international cooperation issues, public perception, grief, hope.
It truly is. A story of shifting suspicions, the incredible power and danger of media focus, and just this relentless, heartbreaking search for answers against incredible odds.
And what stands out, I think, is that resilience you mentioned. The human spirit facing unimaginable loss. How one family's private tragedy became this global obsession, constantly picked apart, re-examined with every new lead or theory.
As we've kind of unpacked all these layers, it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? In this age where we're flooded with information, endless updates, speculation, how do you actually find the truth? How do you hold on to hope when the evidence is so complex, maybe contradictory, and the answers just stay out of reach?